Okay, we're recording. I am Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Irene Martínez Marín, who is a graduate student at Uppsala University in Uppsala, Sweden. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, Brandon.
Awesome. Well, we're doing this interview as part of a mini series I'm doing on Taylor Swift's project of re-recording her back catalog and exploring its philosophical implications. So it's aesthetic, metaphysical, ethical, political, etc. implications. And the reason I want to talk to you is because your work is on aesthetic value and aesthetic valuing practices. And so I guess we'll just start with the question of how are Taylor Swift fans valuing her re-recordings, right? She's released two so far, Fearless and Red, both Taylor's versions in parentheses. And so how are fans responding and receiving and valuing these new recordings?
Okay, so I think it will be useful to start by making maybe a distinction between the long-time Taylor fan, the real Swiftie, we could say, and then the new fan, the converted, I would say, that I think that emerged mainly during the pandemic and the release of Folklore and Evermore. I think that she got like a new whole fandom when she released those two albums. So now it's very interesting because it's been not a long time between the release of those two albums and now the re-recordings. So I think that the appreciation of those albums is going to be quite different between these two groups. So in order to do some research for this conversation, I went into Reddit. I read a lot of stuff on the internet to see what people were thinking, because I would catalog myself as someone that came into Swiftism quite late. I mean, I am one of those like pandemic fans. I listened a lot Evermore and Folklore, and I was not someone that would listen to Taylor before those two albums. So I really need to do my research and see what people thought about this. But I mean, we could just start by saying that I think that appreciation is going to be very different. Firstly, because in terms of knowledge that these two groups have, so the Taylor fan, the long-time Taylor fan, they have grown up with these albums. So they can really go and make the comparison between the original and the Taylor version. And they can spend lots of time arguing and seeing how similar they are, how different. Well, so I think that the new fan is going to be more open in a way. Like they don't really know what this is about. They're just going to go and see if they like it or not. And maybe the comparison they're going to make is not between the original and Taylor's version, but more between this new Taylor that I think the more indie Taylor that we came to know during the pandemic, and the old Taylor, and see if they are so open now that they can also embrace the country Taylor or the pop Taylor that we found in Fearless or in Red, respectively. So yeah, that's what I was saying that.
Yeah. So they're within the fandom itself, right? There's the long-term Taylor Swift fan and sort of the new convert, sort of pandemic era fan. And, you know, how I was originally thinking of it is that these recordings have sort of two audiences, right? There's the Swift fans on the one hand who are sort of familiar with her work and are going to be able to notice any subtle differences between the originals and re-recordings. And then there's the casual listener who may hear it on a radio or may hear it on a movie soundtrack, and they're not going to be able to notice whether it's, you know, Fearless 2008 versus Fearless Taylor's version. And what you're pointing to is that it's a lot more complicated than just sort of that binary within the Swift fandom. There are multiple ways of being a fan, and you know, one of those differences has to do with when you came to Swift's music. And so how about let's start with the long-term fans, right? The ones who grew up with Taylor Swift's music from, you know, the mid 2000s to now. And one thing that, you know, I have a number of students who fall into that category who really grew up with Taylor Swift's music. And their response to the re-recordings, the Taylor's versions, is that they're sort of weird, right? They sound different. They're not the versions of the songs that they're used to. And so there's this sort of uncanny quality to them of, yeah, it's fearless, but it's not really quite fearless. It's Red. And I think what I found is that they have this experience more with Red than with Fearless. And I honestly don't exactly know why, but it's Red, but it's not quite exactly Red. And so in a sense, they prefer the originals because that's what they're used to. In these new versions, yeah, they get what she's doing. They sort of admire her for taking a stand within the music industry in this way. And yet at the same time, we kind of don't like these as much. Right. So could you talk about the long-term fan? Because obviously there's going to be differences there too, right? Some people may genuinely prefer the new versions to the originals. And so could you talk through what it's like for those long-term Taylor Swift fans?
Yeah, so I think as you said, there are also going to be differences of reception also among that group. So because of the things I've been reading, I would just say maybe tell some anecdotes. But for example, I think one thing that the longtime fan really likes about Red particularly is that Taylor Swift has decided to make All Too Well the single of that album, when in the original the original album, that was not like a main song, or it was not a single. You didn't have a video clip or anything like that. So two things. Taylor has now made that like the song of Red. She's directed the video. She's also in it. It's a short film. It's like a super long thing, because also she's decided to give to the fans what she now thinks is the original All Too Well, which is a 10-minute version of the song. So I think on that side, many fans are going to be very, very happy, because I think they feel listened, because in a way, All Too Well for many fans is the song, is one of the favorites. So a curiosity or an interesting thing that Taylor can do now is that in a way she's going back in time, but with all the information that she has now, and that's very cool. I mean, she knows what the fans like. She knows what she can do with that information. So thanks to all that, I think that makes Red like for some fans, like a very interesting album. But I understand also the fans that might feel a bit betrayed, not just these two albums, but because of the project in itself. And there's also like this duality of they want to do good to her and to listen to the tailored versions, but at the same time, those are their songs, especially if you grow up with those songs. You have so many memories attached to them. There's a nostalgia involved, and that re-recording, even if it's maybe fun because you are also like reliving your own self while listening to them, there's something lost. And I think the fans feel that they've lost something. So one example is her voice. So her voice has changed, and for some aesthetic aspects it might be good because it might sound better. She's got more control, but it's also a mature voice. And you've got a 30-year-old woman singing lyrics and also pronouncing words in a way that a teenage wouldn't pronounce it like that. Like the excitement of the voice, some diction, some things that the fans are missing. And if you go into like very detailed discussions of comparing the original and the new version, that's the kind of things that they are kind of focusing on, oh my God, she didn't pronounce that word in the same way. And I miss it. I liked like I don't know, even if it's just like a hey or whatever, I mean, they missed that. So that's, I guess it's difficult to navigate how to appreciate something that in a way for the longtime fan, it's very different. I mean, I think they can really see the differences.
Yeah, so there's not just the noticing of the difference, but given the nature of Taylor Swift's fans and their sort of intensity, I'll just say. There's also the detailed line by line sort of analysis of her vocal performance, right? That she pronounced this word differently. She de-emphasizes this, she emphasizes that, and that affects, to some extent, that's going to affect the meaning of the lyrics, right? That the nature of the delivery, right? Just like vocal inflection can indicate sarcasm or not sarcasm, right? That obviously I don't think she's going full on sarcastic in, like, oh, 16-year-old me had this attitude toward boys, and oh, like rolling her eyes at that. It's not that, but it's, the subtleties of the inflection can change the sort of emotional texture, which can affect how the meanings of the lyrics sort of connect with the listener. And I guess that they're missing out on that. And further, as you said, these were lyrics written by a teenager, performed by a teenager, and so they make sense as words uttered by a teenager, but they sort of make a lot less sense coming out of the mouth of a woman in her 30s, which is something that Lee Cray and I talked about when we were talking about personas, right? That there's something very, very different going on. And so that's really interesting, right? That the fans are really digging into these subtleties and, maybe finding some that they like, but some that they dislike.
Yeah. And another like anecdote, and this one's a bit more crazy. There are like Reddit threads already predicting what things she's gonna do bad in a way for them. Like they're like fearing, like, we really hope that when she pronounces this word, she does it like in the original, because we really like that way of Taylor like singing that particular bit of the song. So there are already like predictions and like fears of the fans on what's gonna happen, because they're so attached to these songs. That in a way, I think that they will really, I mean, maybe it depends on the fan, but maybe they will really like a real sonic duplicity, like that they were exactly the same, for some fans. Like, please don't get creative. just give me my thing.
Yeah, play the hit like you used to play the hit, right? And in a sense, that's sort of, in sort of the rock pop tradition, that's what fans look for in concerts, right? Is play the songs we know the way we know them. If some bands can get away with more, or groups or artists can get away with more artistic liberties in terms of live performance, but it's very much unlike jazz, where you don't play it the same again. And if you do play it the same again, fans are gonna come after you. Whereas in sort of the rock pop tradition, it's very much the valuing practice of, we value the thing that occurred on the album, give that to us again. And if you don't, in some sense, you've let us down. And it's interesting then that that's playing out with respect to re-recordings, because generally when we think of artists re-recording something, they're doing a new arrangement, or there's, it's an acoustic version, or, it's electronic, hip hop, pop, something version, right? It's changed in some way, but, she's giving us the same thing again. And so in some sense, the fans want the same thing again. And so they really are looking for complete fidelity to the original sound. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I feel like you're right. It hooks into the nostalgia thing, that this is what we're used to, that this means something to me. And when I hear these songs again, they're sort of connecting me to my past self. And if they're slightly different, that connection is not going to be as strong. And so, yeah, that's interesting. And so what's really interesting here is there's a tension, I guess, that this project of re-recording is meant in part, I mean, it's a financial move, perhaps largely, but it's meant in part as a way of establishing, or not really establishing, expressing her independence as an artist and her autonomy. And so fans like that part of it, but they don't like that she's exercising it in terms of the actual production and the singing. So that's a really interesting tension that never occurred to me.
Yeah. And I think that with that, like that same tension is something that the new fan, as we were saying, maybe is not going to have any issues or trouble with, like, okay. So I think also, to make things more complicated, also within the new fans, I think there are going to be two kinds of new fans. The one that is super open and is like, yes, I've liked these two albums, Folklore and Evermore, and okay, if she can do this, I'm just open. I'm gonna see what she used to do. I'm gonna listen to this. But I think there's another maybe fan that might be more hesitant and say, look, I'm just going to stick with the indie Taylor, and maybe that's enough. They don't want to go all the way. They don't want the self-transformation. They just want a little bit of it. But I think that the way that Taylor is including collaborations, particularly in Red, it's also, I don't know if this is a strategy, but she can get the attention of particularly like the new fans. So I'm thinking especially of the Phoebe Bridgers collaboration of Nothing New. I mean, that's something that the people that were listening and liking Everman Folklore, just like a bridge, I think. Well, yeah, bridge. For the old albums, I think. And I'm really excited for that track, for example. But I think because I come from that, that's how I got into Taylor. So it feels more natural to get into the re-recordings via artists that you feel more maybe connected or something like that. So I think that yes, the multiple possibilities of getting into those old albums, also for the new fans. That, I mean, I think I never heard, I never listened to like a whole old Taylor album. I mean, I knew some songs, like the hits ones. I mean, like the ones that you listen to the radio, but I had never listened to Fearless or Red. So this has been the way, for example, for me to listen to that. I mean, maybe the new fan is not going to love all the songs because they're very different. But I mean, you can give it a try.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so part of what you're pointing to is just how savvy she is as someone who, in terms of her audience, right? That you know, yeah, I'm getting new fans now, and they might not be connected to the original albums in a way. So I'm going to collaborate with all these cool people that you know, my new fans also like, as a way to connect them with the originals in some way, while in some sense trying not to get them to buy or stream the originals. Right? That, yeah, so this is my way of giving them the original albums without giving them the original albums, right? That these are new versions that are sort of close in a lot of respects to the original, that sort of have largely the same feel, largely the same vibe, although clearly there are vocal and other sorts of differences. And so here's, you know, you get my versions of them. They're sort of the mature, polished versions of them. And so that's interesting. And it sort of reminds me of, you know, sort of to go into an area that's more my wheelhouse, sort of Star Wars fans, right? They're the Star Wars fans who grew up with the special editions of the original trilogy because they were the only ones available for purchase or for watching, because George Lucas made the original versions, just you couldn't buy them, you couldn't see them, right? And so there are fans that grew up with the special editions that have all of the, you know, the new CGI and extra scenes and stuff. And sort of fans going, you know, who grew up with that, going back to the originals may feel odd, right? That where's Jabba the Hutt in A New Hope, right? Why does you know, the Death Star explode in a different way, right? And so there could be that sort of jarring effect, right? Of there's something off, that this is a thing I grew up with, which is different than the thing my parents grew up with. And I like the thing I grew up with because I grew up with it, right?
That's right. Yeah. So another thing that I was thinking about the new fan is, I think that this fan group or this fandom is also now, when you ask yourself, why didn't I like Taylor Swift before? And I think it's also linked again with the conversation you had about the personas. I think it's very clear, and this is something that's obvious, that there are different Taylors. And she's made that I don't know, it's just even aesthetically visual. Like if you see the different video clips, and every album has like an art surrounding each album, so we can see that. And so I think that the new fan is now again asking themselves, I mean, there might be a reason why I didn't listen to this stuff, but was I right? Was I just prejudiced? And I think that's something that I've asked myself, for example. I mean, like, why didn't I think that Taylor Swift was cool? and now I'm listening to it. Has she changed? Have I changed? Have we both changed? But I think that that this also links to something bigger, and not just her music, but how you present yourself as an artist. And it's clear that the Taylor of 2022 is very different to the Taylor of 2006, 2008, when these albums were originally recorded. And for example, one reason why maybe I was not into her music, and it had nothing to do, I think, particularly with the music, but I, for example, it was lack of knowledge. I didn't know that she wrote all her songs. I kind of thought that it was more like a product. Maybe there was even like some internalized misogynistic thoughts that I had. Like maybe when you are in your early 20s, you think like, no, male singers and writers are the cool ones. I mean, like they are so deep, they really get it. And now you think about it and it's like, well, maybe I was closer in my way of seeing things or the emotions I was feeling when I was 20-year-old to the things that Taylor was writing about. I mean, maybe it was just prejudice. But I think another reason, maybe it was even political. Taylor, for a very long time, we know, she was completely apolitical. We didn't know where she stand, and that also made you fear that maybe she didn't stand where you would like her to stand. And it's only recently, maybe in 2018, I'm not sure, when she went like more, she started talking more openly and tweeting, and then you was okay. She's not just this Taylor commercial music thing. She's got her own views. I think that's the real. That's what we can talk about Taylor being independent, having her own agency. I think that those kind of things that maybe you associated with other artists that you listen to and that contributed to you liking those artists, you start seeing those also features on Taylor. And there's like a big change. So I think it's not just the music or if you liked or not what she did, but also how she presented herself.
Yeah, and I think a further reason may have to do with the music is that she starts off in country and pop country, right? And at least in the United States, you know, if you're not a country fan, you hate country music, right? That it's lesser than other forms of popular music. And so that could be a part of it, at least among American fans and maybe, you know, other sorts of fans. But, you know, she's working in a genre that's easy to dismiss as inauthentic, as conservative politically, as white nationalistic, perhaps in certain respects. And so, yeah, that could be, you know, feeding into why a lot of people weren't willing to get into her. And then when she goes, you know, into her pop phase, right, then people are able to sort of, okay, she's not doing that thing anymore. And so now I can get into it. And now that she's in her more indie phase, that there's a whole other group of, you know, a new audience opened up. And what that's going to mean is maybe that, you know, when she shifted from country to pop, she probably lost a portion of her audience, right? And then sort of the shift away from pop to the more indie sound is probably going to alienate some of the audience. And so this is the version of Taylor I like. This is the one I'm going to stick to. I don't like where she's going as an artist. That's true. Yes, that's so true. Yeah. And that's also when maybe that happens when you're really into it. Like now, okay, now I really like what she's doing. And that's when, again, you might feel betrayed when she changes styles and it's like, oh, I like the old Taylor. So yeah, that and that will happen. I'm sure that she will
in a couple of years, she will start doing other stuff. And then we'll see how also we're going to navigate like our feelings towards her music and towards herself as a persona.
Yeah, can we talk about this sense of betrayal for a bit? Because I think that it's really interesting and really problematic, right? Because what it depends on is from the fan, I think the sense that the artist owes me something, right? And I mean, my sense is that artists don't really owe their fans anything. And yet there's this sort of deep sense of their work is bound up with my identity. And so anything that deviates from how I identify with them or I view them and how it impacts me is a sense of betrayal of me in a really deep and personal way. And so, yeah, I want the artist to change, but not too much. Right. And so a hard shift from country to pop or from pop to indie, right? Those moments, and artists are, of course, free to do that. And yet some fans feel deeply hurt and betrayed. So could we talk maybe about that for a bit, maybe in the context of Taylor Swift or with respect to other artists? I don't care. Either way is fine.
Okay, good. No, I think that's super interesting and a difficult like topic, and in a way how you relate with aesthetic objects. I mean, as you said, it seems like your aesthetic self, it's so connected to your practical self that when that thing is in risk, or you kind of just want to embrace it harder and not let it go, because you feel like there's a bigger part of yourself that you're being asked to modify or change. So I think that valuing in general, like valuing choose your aesthetic love or your whatever you love, like maintaining that relationship is a very difficult one, and it's one that sometimes because other things happen and other aesthetic loves enter your aesthetic life, sometimes you need to abandon certain things, not in terms, I think, of coherence between those aesthetic objects, but more, I think, in terms of internal coherence and how those new objects match your wider system of beliefs or relative judgments. So if Taylor changes now, and you are really like an indie fan, you are someone that listens The National, and you're super happy that she's constantly collaborating with Jack Antonoff because that's the sound, that's your sound, right? And then she goes and does something else. I think that betrayal, as you said, is not really between the artist and yourself. The artist is free, and that's actually what we like about artists. I mean, like, we like that they exercise that freedom and that they don't like have to respond to anyone. I mean, like, to society or to the fans. If not, we will think that they are so restricted that are not going to do good stuff. But so I think the betrayal is with yourself. I mean, it's between your old self and your new self. It's like, am I willing to live behind this person that loved this kind of stuff? Am I willing to now be open and engage with things that I disliked, aesthetically disliked? So I think that valuing is this constant process of reevaluating your judgments and your likings, and it's the constant battle, I think, between making them cohere. So I think it's those moments of friction where what you judge and what you like seems to be, there seems to be like a mismatch, that then you need to ask yourself, which one am I willing to drop? Should I just change my liking, or should I stop perceiving as beautiful something that maybe is no longer beautiful? So I think that's constant negotiation is within oneself. But maybe it's easier for the fan just to say, God damn it, Taylor, why did you do that to me? Now I have to make this difficult, like, kind of aesthetic decisions. Do I want to to just go back to my stuff and just keep like listening and go into deeper detail on why I like this? Or should I just be open and introduce a new thing? I mean, of course, there's room for many aesthetic loves, but there seems that there are some that are more intentional but it's a very interesting question, and I think it's a difficult one. And that's, I think, how we navigate our lives constantly on the things because the things that we value are the ones that we really care about, and we devote not only our time but also our energy, our emotions, the things that we are willing to share with others. And when those things we think that they're on risk, that it's problematic navigating that kind of tensions.
Yeah, and so I mean, part of what you're saying, I think, is that there's a lot of vulnerability that comes with loving something, right? And that's true of persons and also true of aesthetic objects, right? And here we have a person bound up with a set of aesthetic objects, right? Or maybe a set of persons, right? The various versions of Taylor Swift, right? Sort of bound up with them. And yeah, there's a question of she's going in a direction that I'm not used to and that I'm not comfortable with. And I don't know if I want to go along with that, but I still value her. And so I value her, but I can't go along with her. And so in some sense, she's leaving me behind. And that then I think, leads to the sense of betrayal, but it's based on this sense of false intimacy, right? That it's not a sort of regular relationship we have with artists and celebrities, right? It's very much, a stranger relationship. And yet, in order for her to do what she's done, she has to sort of breathe this sense of intimacy with their audience. And so, and that's true of not just Taylor Swift, but of most artists, right? They have to have that sense of intimacy with their artists, and especially working in popular media. And then, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, and maybe with Taylor it's even a bit more, because of the content of her songs. We think that normally she said this openly in interviews, they're very much based on her life, even if it's not always telling exactly what happened. But I think also that helps to create what you were saying, that kind of sense of false intimacy. I mean, you don't really know her that well. Even if she's apparently telling you all this, and she's being vulnerable through her music, you're still like, you're not friends, put it that way. But also what I was doing a bit of research for this, one thing that you constantly hear or read is that Taylor's fan base is that she has a very close relationship with them. But then I was looking at her social media, like her Twitter and Instagram, and I don't think that's exactly right. She barely tweets or posts anything. I mean, you can see that there are gaps sometimes of 2 or 3 months between one Instagram post and another one. And she doesn't like show you like other celebrities do, like more her personal life, like her house or things like that. So she still has some secrecy and there's like still, I think, like a distance. So I think that more the connection that the fans have is with the songs. Not so much, I think, that with Taylor, the person Taylor. I think that her songs allow for that kind of close fan relationship, because it seems that the songs talk to you, they're very relatable, also because there are deep narratives on her albums and in particular songs. She's a storyteller, but I think not so much as a celebrity that connects with her fans by showing her personal life. So I think that's sometimes, I think, a misunderstanding of the kind of relation that Taylor has with her fans. I think it's more through her music that she produces a lot of things related to her music. She goes into this crazy grand tours. So she's an artist that's been everywhere. So it's easy if you want to go and see a Taylor show. But I think it's not the same as with other artists that you maybe really, even if it's fake, but you can more think, okay, she's showing me the family, she's showing me the where she lives or what she's doing this holiday. We don't really get that info with her. So
yeah, we get that through documentaries, basically,
yeah.
right? And so it's interesting, right? That her social media very much is not intimate at all, right? It's all commercial, basically, in a sense that I'm hinting about when the next album is going to drop, what the next album's going to be, or what the next single is. It's very much that. And so it's, you know, we were talking about this a bit before we started recording, but it's very much sort of like a game she's playing with her fans, as sort of dropping hints here and there and letting them sort of fill in details and getting them on Reddit and within the fan community is like, oh, it's going to be this, and no, this is my theory, and we have all these competing theories about what's going on, and that's not exactly intimacy. It's creating intimacy among fans, but it's not intimacy between fan and artist.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's exactly right. That that the Swiftie community is very much a community because they interact a lot. As you said, they had all these theories that they feed into each other. Like, oh, I saw this, I saw that, and they just come up together. Maybe it's just a game they play. I don't think it's a game that Taylor actually plays with the fans, but it's within that group. And maybe that, yeah, that's a peculiarity of this fan group, that they are constantly interacting and talking to each other about this, trying to solve something together, even if, as you say, it's a bit commercial because it's just a puzzle. When is it going to be the next recording, the next release, and things like that? But yeah.
Yeah, and further, I mean, the community-based thing, I think that hooks into what we were just talking about with Betrayal, right? It's not, you know, that Taylor betrayed me personally. I think she's betrayed us in some sense, or at least some contingent of her fan base, and it's a community sort of betrayal, and it sort of has to do, I think, partly with the nature of the community, right? That some of the community are going to leave us behind now because there's disagreement, right? We liked it better when there was unity and conformity, and now there's a fracturing going on, and that's, you know, we talked about earlier, sort of the old fans versus the new fans, and old in terms of longevity, not in terms of like age necessarily. But yeah. So it seems like she's betrayed us, right, in some way. And another thing we were talking about before we were recording that you mentioned is that some fans are sort of complaining about how she's releasing the re-recordings and that it's too commercial for their taste. So can we talk about that for a bit, and maybe we'll end on that topic?
Yes. So I was reading that people were a bit like disappointed or annoyed at how how the releases are going. So they're very much treating each re-recording as if it was a new album. And I think the fans feel like, well, we know this album already. We just want all the original ones already to be recorded so we can just keep listening to Taylor's music as we used to do, and not just have to wait months or many months between the re-recordings. And I think that they really feel like it is very obvious that it's a commercial strategy, because there's new merch with every new album. There are new video clips. They really do a campaign as it was a new album. And I think fans feel like there's something lost in the original idea of, okay, if it's just a matter of owning her music, being independent, and just making some big move here about artist rights, you could do that in a different way, right? You could just release the albums one by one. We don't have to make a big show and a big thing for every album, and just go back to normal in a way. But no, I mean, there's kind of, I think there's a feeling there among the old fans. Yeah.
And perhaps among both old and new, that this project that she's undertaking, which I think generally is a commercial one, not as much an aesthetic one, although I think you can't really separate those two, is that this project is preventing her from making new music, right? In some sense, that all of the time and energy she's devoting into meticulously reproducing something she's already produced is preventing new stuff from coming out, right? Because she's one person and has a finite amount of time energy, and she can't pour all of that into new stuff when she's doing, redoing the old stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that point, but it's true. I mean, I guess that the fan that just came out after listening to these 2 albums during the pandemic, they just want more of that. They want that sound, and are not getting that. So I can also I can understand if that's also a feeling that a fan could have, like this new fan, like, and you might also lose that fun during this process. Because the sounds are very different between the old albums and the new ones. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of a tricky position that in a sense she was put in, not necessarily that she put herself in. And yet, she was put in this unpleasant position, and now she's responding to it. And the way she's chosen to responding to it, which is a way of expressing her independence and autonomy as an artist, could at the same time alienate some portion, probably a small portion, but some portion of her fan base. And in a sense, she's used to alienating her fan base. I think as all good artists who sort of change and evolve over time are. And so I don't think that's necessarily a negative. It could be a net positive in the end. But I think we'll need to end there because we've been talking for a while. So Irene, thank you so much for joining me. This was really fun.
It was very fun. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you.